And it all goes back to the idea that race is a social construct. There's not a scientific way to really differentiate between who is black and who is white.
Well, I mean, I can look at you and say that, we look different. You've got different color skin. I mean,
that's based upon phenotypic things that you can observe. But if you actually look at the human genome, there is no way scientifically to say.
So you're saying that basically if you took like two DNA groups of
exactly,
two people, it would be...
right, exactly.
How's it going, everybody? You may notice that we're doing a podcast episode on a Thursday, and this is because, last week we were scrambling to try and find a guest, and I felt like we shouldn't constrain ourselves to doing important interviews and discussions just on Sunday, and we were able to get a really awesome guest for today, which we're going to be... Well, why don't we just start? My name is Tim Poole. I'm a journalist, if you're not familiar. We've got two people today.
My name is Zach Wood. I'm an assistant editor at the Atlantic Monthly.
And I'm Emily Molly. I'm also a journalist.
So, Zach, are you the youngest TED speaker?
I think I'm one of them, yes.
One of the youngest.
Yes.
Because you're 21, right?
22.
22.
Yeah.
So this is a guy who spoke on the TED stage about, I guess, it was civility and being willing to engage and debate those you disagree with. That's true?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah, exactly.
I got it right.
Yeah.
And you're also an author of a book, and your book's about censorship?
Yeah, so it's I'm the author of a book called Uncensored. It's a memoir, and it's the story of my life, and specifically the experiences that inform my views on issues like free speech and race and class.
So you're kind of the perfect guest for the Culture War podcast, being that you're arguing for confronting the other side and having these debates, and you wrote a book about opposing censorship and free speech.
Exactly.
But you're at the Atlantic, so a lot of people are going to say you're a mainstream media guy. I mean, is that true?
I would say that for me, journalism is something that I'm interested in because it gives you an opportunity to express your viewpoint on issues that I really care about, and so I've always been interested in the public sphere, and so I see it as a way to engage.
Right on. Okay, so let's just get into it. I think first let's talk about some civility issues because that's one of your areas of expertise. Man, we've seen street battles. Antifa and Patriot Prayer was recently where mortar shells were exploding in the street. People were beating each other. There's this video that they're calling this Proud Boy One Punch Man. It's a reference to anime if you aren't familiar, where the superhero can just knock out everybody with one punch because this Antifa guy's got a baton and he's swinging it, and this guy just hits him once and the guy goes down. But then outside of street battles, we had Sarah Huckabee Sanders being asked to leave a restaurant, and apparently not only was she asked to leave, but I guess people followed her afterwards and started protesting. And now I guess there's some stories about Mitch McConnell. So, do you know what happened with Mitch McConnell?
Right. He was his restaurant, right?
He was at a restaurant.
Yeah.
Protesters showed up.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. I think all of these examples kind of speak to the same issue, and that is that because we have deep political, moral disagreements with someone, we feel as though we cannot be civil with them. And that's something that I think that's bad for democracy. I don't think it represents or reflects the ideals that our country was founded upon. And I just think it sets bad precedent after bad precedent.
Oh, yeah. 2 restaurants in 2 days.
Right.
That's impressive.
You had Maxine Waters saying, when you see members of his cabinet, I believe, surround them, push on them. And, if somebody wants to engage in a protest, that's a fundamental principle.
Channel of dissent, I encourage, right. Yeah.
But then it becomes an issue when you're not protesting the idea or the institution, but going to somebody while they're eating dinner becomes a little bit more complicated. And I guess, one of the things that kind of worries me is that we're seeing rhetoric from the far left rejecting civility. I mean, obviously the far right rejects civility.
Absolutely.
But we see this, far left kind of bleed into more mainstream left where they're agreeing with it and saying, don't be civil with other people. I had a discussion with this activist who said Trump supporters are too far gone. There's no point in talking to them.
Right.
And I'm like, what's your solution then?
Right. I mean,
that scares me.
If we're not talking, then how are we going to build and understand? You know what I mean?
We're not
going to build. Right. Exactly.
Well, when you see a lot of these people, not all of them, it's actually a very small minority getting violent.
Right.
And then you have other people saying there's no point in talking. It kind of worries me what direction it's all headed in.
It's a lot of people rejecting even the idea of empathizing or understanding, which scares me. I mean, even seeing journalists do it freaks me out, just because the whole idea of journalism is trying to understand people and why they have the issues that they're having, And I don't expect the average person to engage on the same level that journalists do, but I do think it's necessary for people to understand each other and empathize.
So let me ask a controversial question. Not too controversial. Yeah. Who do you think is being less civil right now, the left or the right? Republicans, Democrats?
Are we talking about the extremes, or are we talking just in general?
Just in general. I mean, because there's a degree of civility missing from the right as much as the left. But in terms of your opinion, who do you think's doing a worse job of it? I suppose.
I'd have to say the right.
Yeah.
And I say that in one because Trump ran as a Republican, even though I don't think that he is consistently, represented or stood for what many would identify as conservative principles.
Yeah,
he ran as a conservative, and so because of that, I mean, if you look at the tweets, if you look at examples of insensitivity one after the other, and then you look at a number of people who support him at various levels of government, I think I'd have to say the right. But that's not to say that there aren't examples on both sides.
Right.
I do think you had that whole F your feelings
thing, right.
especially behind Trump supporters, where they really don't care how other people feel about certain things. I mean, I'm not talking about rejecting facts, but you still have to take into account that people have feelings over certain policies or even over certain. It really doesn't matter. But if you just say, "Oh, it's stupid for you to feel that way,"
you're not going to get anywhere doing that.
Exactly. That's the same rejection of empathy.
Yeah, to me, it's kind of like the escalation of force.
Right.
And you've got the street conflicts, but you've got this where, Trump was pretty crass to say the least. In his campaign and how, when he said, hit that guy and I'll pay your legal bills and stuff like that, or something to that effect.
Or I could walk out on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I still get elected. I mean,
come
on now. What kind of serious,
No
so,
kidding.
I mean, you're right.
But so, it's interesting to me then that we do see the left sort of return the favor.
Right.
But I want to make sure I separate the physical violence from the being a dick.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Because
they're different.
Yeah. So we can have a conversation about violence, but when we're talking specifically about being uncivil, I'd say I agree with you that it seems like, actually, I take that back. I honestly don't know where I'd put myself because I see so much of both sides kind of doing this.
Right.
I think it's fair to say that a lot of it moved forward, escalated with Trump and with the after feelings and stuff. But for me to say that one side's doing it more than the other, I just don't feel like I have the facts to
just say that. Right.
But I'm not saying you're wrong or anything. By all means, have your opinions. But it definitely there have been people on the left who are saying it's because of you. There was one tweet in particular saying, "Where did civility go? You called it political correctness and mocked us for it."
Right.
Which I disagree with. But that's sort of like the sentiment that we're seeing.
I think they have a good point though.
And,
go ahead.
And I mean, I think they have a good point. I think it depends on where you're looking. If you're looking at college campuses, then I would say you see more intolerance on the left.
Absolutely.
Right? If you're looking at the executive branch, then I'd say you see more intolerance on the right. So you see what I mean? So it depends upon what sector of society we're looking at.
And that's on point. That's exactly why I feel like I can't really point the finger at anybody.
Right.
Because look at these college campuses, and Ben Shapiro needed 600 police officers.
Yeah.
Just to
Which
be
is insane.
Ben Shapiro's not that controversial.
Right.
He's just a conservative. He's certainly not like Milo, who tries,
or Richard Spencer, or
seriously.
Yeah.
But then you look at there's. I don't want to call it any group specifically, but there are certainly people online that have no problem mocking the other side.
Right.
And I've called out people associated with I guess you'd call it like the skeptic community or anti-social justice warrior community, anti-CW, for being mean. I don't think it's productive.
Right.
So I don't think I do feel like a lot of this started to escalate with crude comments and jokes at the expense of others coming from people who are targeting the left.
I think we're always making it more difficult to have the kinds of conversations that we should be having when things devolve to like ad hominem attacks and character attacks and people you haven't met, people you haven't made an effort to even understand, and you just start hurling insults, right? That's not getting us anywhere.
So let's get into the extreme civility you offered to the man Charles Murray. And who was the other guy that you invited?
So I invited John Derbyshire to campus, and he was a writer for National Review before he was fired for writing a very controversial article about race in Taki magazine, and he made a number of incendiary, inflammatory claims. A number of offensive statements. A few of them. One was that intelligent, well-socialized African Americans were as rare as commercial jets.
Oh my God.
So, I mean, that's, he put some thought into that one too, right? In the wording and everything.
Well, as rare as commercial jets.
Yeah.
But they're fairly common.
Common,
there's
right,
a ton of them. So was that a compliment or an insult?
It was, I mean, he meant it as an insult. And he was also saying things like stay away from large groups of black people, stay out of heavily black neighborhoods, things like this. And so,
crazy.
and so he gets fired from the National Review for saying this, the leading conservative magazine right now and for the last, 30, 40 years.
Wow.
And so, my view was I want to understand someone who is an articulate spokesperson for Trump's view on immigration, race, and national identity. And Derbyshire, I thought, was a good example of that.
Oh, that seems a little extreme to me. I mean, do you think Trump, his views align with that kind of article? That's a crazy article.
So that's, it depends, because the thing is, I don't really know what Trump thinks sometimes. I know what he says. And I know that it seems insensitive. It's very offensive, often very offensive. But I don't really know what he thinks. You know what I mean? I don't see much conviction there. So it's tough to know what he thinks. But I will say this: it's that there is clearly the evidence. The election was evidence of this. A significant segment of the American electorate that believes in and supports and appreciated a good bit of what he had to say. Yeah. And so I thought that Derbyshire gave voice to, specifically with regard to immigration in particular, what Trump was saying while he was running for office.
What was the reaction when you invited him to campus?
So it was backlash from the beginning. The moment I made the invitation and made the Facebook announcement, I would say within 5 minutes, I was, I looked down at my phone and I've got 10 text messages. I check my email and I've got
where's the civility,
a number of emails. And, these are not emails and text messages saying, Zach, I disagree with this decision, or like, what are you doing? It's, you're a traitor to your race.
Oh, wow.
You're a sellout.
That is
you're an Uncle Tom, right? You know what I mean?
I was going to
exactly.
say the UT slur.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So a lot of that, and it was just coming in droves, right?
It's crazy to me because, I mean, people who watch my channel know that the key argument as to why you confront the ideas is to disprove them.
Exactly.
Is to challenge them. Is to, because, look, if you're going to allow these people to go unchallenged, then people will never hear the counterpoints.
Right.
Absolutely.
They'll only hear the pro from the individual and never the counter from the opposition. And then they're not going to, they're going to just fall in line and believe it.
Exactly.
I mean, and what this was what university was this you invited?
So this was Williams College, and one of the unique things about that is this is a small liberal arts college in Western Massachusetts, and so everything that is controversial on that campus feels to most of the student body more personal, more intimate. Mm-hmm. It's like you invite the speaker, people feel like this is invading my space because the campus is only 2,300 people. So whereas if you're at Syracuse or UCLA, a campus that's 20 times bigger, you see what I mean? It's different. So it's, I would remember walking into the cafeteria and literally every head turns in my direction. I mean, that's.
Was there any violence or any threats, like actual?
There were a few implicit threats. A couple notes slipped under my door.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah. A couple phone calls from blocked numbers.
Wow.
Yeah. No one who made a threat to my face. The closest thing that I heard to that was when I invited Suzanne Vanker. A student sat down and said, this is not going to happen.
Who?
And that happened again with John Derbyshire. Someone sat down and said he is not going to make it through the door.
You said Susan Vanker?
Suzanne Vanker. So she was an anti-feminist social critic who wrote a book called The Flip Side of Feminism. And the idea there was to engage with someone who was very critical of feminism. Mm-hmm. And there was backlash there too.
You see, here's the thing. There's so many people talking about this walk away campaign.
Yeah.
And what bothers me is, Fox says that it's people turning on liberalism. And I'm like, no. Like what we're seeing with this incivility is not liberalism. You can call it regressive, call it whatever you want, but it's very authoritative. Mm-hmm. Do it or else. And it bugs me that people are going to claim, like we're going to lose people. When I hear you speak, you're critical of Trump.
Right.
You even said you think the right is less civil, or at least started it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, here's a liberal guy.
Right. Yeah.
Who is advocating for free expression,
Exactly.
the right for controversial opinions on college campuses, and you're putting your money where your mouth is and inviting them.
Yeah.
And facing the brunt of this, authoritative dogma, whatever it is.
Right.
Because you see that confrontationalism on both sides. That's not something that's exclusive to liberals or to the far left.
Exactly.
It's just people who really want to impose their will on you.
Right.
I know that there's going to be timestamps in the comments.
Yeah.
When I asked you who do you think's doing it worse, and you said the right.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to timestamp that moment and be like, he's wrong.
He's
you're
right.
lying,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. I'm sure.
Because people get passionate and emotional about it, and everybody feels like they're on the right side. Otherwise, they wouldn't be on that side. And that's what bugs me about the whole civility argument and the campus free speech stuff is that, if people are going to college to learn, bring on Charles Murray. Let's hear it. And then present a thought-out argument. That's what the point of college is. And you argue against that. You're going to push people away.
There is a scholar who's done a lot of work around the area of viewpoint diversity and free speech on college campuses, and his name is John Haidt.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, and he's at the Stern Business School at New York University. And he has said that naturally human beings have a kind of instinct to be kind of tribalistic, in that, if you look at it evolutionarily, we have a better chance of surviving when we, have that kind of tribal impulse.
Right.
But one thing that he notes is that it's very important, especially in intellectual settings, to resist that impulse to be tribal, because it can make you very insular, it can lead to intolerance, and it can lead to a lot of what we're seeing on campuses today.
I'm kind of I must be defective because I've always been really anti-tribal and roguish.
Right. Yeah.
Everyone's always wrong, no matter who the authority is, no matter what the group is. I'm very contrarian.
Right.
And that's I've been accused of. I made a video where I said that I was like a social liberal and I supported Bernie, and all of a sudden these conservatives were like, "It's a trap," thinking that I'm trying to like coax people into. I'm reasonable. I'll criticize Antifa, and then they're gonna walk into my trap, and then I'll be like liberalism.
Right.
It's like, no, I'm just trying to be reasonable and rational. But then the far left calls me like a far right propagandist. It's like, heaven forbid you try and criticize extremists and not take sides.
This whole, and name calling is not an argument, right? Labels. That's saying someone is this or that or whatever. That's not intellectual engagement.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're not even engaging the ideas.
Exactly.
You're just being like, well,
this is a way to dismiss.
Yeah.
This,
totally
mischaracterized, right?
Yep.
So we have to call that out.
Yeah. Man, it's crazy to me that, you're a good example of this. Other people are. You weren't even given a chance to explain to some of the people who were attacking you when you made these invites, right?
Yeah, people were not approaching me saying, "Oh, so Zach, I want to really understand why did you invite?" So that wasn't the
right.
By and large, it was, "Let me tell you how pissed I am."
Yeah.
That you you did this.
I'd imagine you were called alt-right or a white supremacist. Or something.
I actually did get the white supremacist card, and there's this thing called Yik Yak at the time, which is like anonymous Twitter, so you can say whatever you want to say, and you don't have to identify yourself in any way. So that means people are saying all manner of things. And so someone puts on there, "I know Zach Wood is a white supremacist." And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? This person totally has seen me and knows who come on now, right? That makes a whole lot of sense, right?
So I don't know if you mentioned this, but you do have political ambitions.
Yes, I do.
Are you concerned because the left is not going to, look, they're the ones saying challenge.
Right.
They're not the only ones, but Maxine Water is saying, protest these people. It's the left who are saying they shouldn't have these speakers. I really don't see them tolerating you being a rational person.
I think I appreciated the fact that when Obama was still in office, there was that video where he's on stage and he's talking to college students, and he says, "I don't think that you should be coddled on college campuses." So I do think there are examples in which you have leaders, prominent figures on the left who are saying, this isn't how it should be on college campuses. Mm-hmm. It's not good for our civic life. It's not good for education. It's not good for learning.
I just thought of something, a beautiful vision of the future. 10 years ago, you as a liberal who I assume you support Obama.
Yeah, strong supporter.
They're going to be conservatives yelling at you and insulting you. Right. Today, because of how crazy it's gotten in the fringes, they're going to support you.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I absolutely disagree with you on policy. I'm not a big fan of Obama, but I really appreciate you being civil and having the conversation. And that actually opens the door to liberals and conservatives having real conversations.
Right.
More so than it was in the past. I guess I can say thank you, extremists, for making everyone else look much more reasonable and approachable.
Right, yeah.
But I guess I am worried about the extremists taking over, actually seeping in, and then we don't have these conversations. We don't have these thinkers and these controversial ideas.
I do think it is important to recognize, like you said, the yik yak harassment.
Right,
You got a lot of this is online. A lot of this is indirect. And except for things like Mitch McConnell and Sarah Huckabee Sanders,
Turtlehead, they called him, right?
And even what happened to Steve Bannon in that bookstore, a lot of this harassment is usually online. And I feel like more of the right side harassment is online, and the left likes to keep it anonymous, but usually behind masks.
Right.
So I'm wondering at what point.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, it becomes more personal.
I wanted to push back on it being the right online, but no, I think that's actually true because the right isn't going out in the street and protesting.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah, they're on the internet making comments, and I think that's why you'll see these YouTube videos get mass downvoted. The rights. You know why I think that is? Because where is the right? They're spread out across all of the country. They're not in centralized areas. So it's really easy for the left to get a big protest in New York.
Yeah, I think that is a major factor.
And then the right has to mobilize online because they're very spread out. So
Where in places like Charlottesville, you did see so many people coming from across the country
to rally together.
Yeah,
right?
and that's rare.
But what percentage of Charlottesville was regular right wingers? And
those are
was
all
a lot of
extremists,
fringe.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say not all of them were right wing fringe, but I think too much of them were to the point where it's
Yeah, definitely. And that's why, interestingly enough, there's a lot of those fringe groups that aren't participating in the Unite the Right 2.0 this year.
The fringe groups aren't.
Yeah, National Socialists, I believe. I can't remember if League of the South also said, but it's mostly because they don't believe in Jason Kessler, the organizer, and they don't see him as a strong leader, so they're like, F that guy.
I think they're all kind of weirdos.
Oh, yeah.
It's a
Not
fringe
kind of,
issue.
they're definitely weirdos.
Yeah. Well, so then speaking of fringe weirdos, and I don't want to impugn the honor of Charles Murray because I don't really know a lot about him. I just know that he has this really controversial...
extremely controversial.
Yeah, extremely controversial piece about race and intelligence. So what are your thoughts on him?
So I deeply disagree with Charles Murray. One is with the argument he makes in the bell curve. And then the implications as well.
Let's start with people might not know what the bell curve is.
So the bell curve, he wrote this, I believe it was in 1994. And it was a book in which he did these studies. And from these studies that he conducted, he demonstrated, argued that there were aggregate differences in intelligence between whites and blacks. And that we could use this understanding to inform social policy. And it was extremely controversial, obviously, because he's saying that, it toes this line of saying that one race is intellectually inferior to another.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you disagree with that?
Deeply disagree with it. One, fundamentally for me, it's the way in which intelligence is being posited and defined. I think intelligence is something that's complicated. I don't think that any one test is really going to tell you how intelligent or talented someone is, right?
Yeah.
I think if you look at Howard Gardner at Harvard, he's a psychologist at Harvard who's known for this theory of multiple intelligences. And he says that there are 8, now 9 different kinds: existential, linguistic, naturalistic, various kinds. And so the idea that an IQ test is going to tell you how smart someone is, that's my fundamental issue.
And I have, I don't want to insult any, well, okay, I'm for the sake of privacy of the individual, I'm going to be very restrictive on what information I give up. But I know somebody who is a member of Mensa, who is convinced that because they're in Mensa, they're smarter than everybody, and they're not. So there was somebody in Mensa or a former Mensa said something about how these tests and the IQ tests are simply people who are good at solving puzzles. Right. They're not actually smarter or more capable of understanding policy and how the world functions or anything like that, simply because they know how many sides are on a cube and what pattern fits what pattern. You can show that they're good at solving patterns and solving puzzles. Exactly. And there are linguistic, aspects to the test and all that, but it doesn't mean...
And there are so many factors early on in your life, from birth, that can really impact how well you're going to do in an IQ test. Are your parents around? Are they talking to you? Are they reading to you? Are you traveling? What are you exposed to? Right? Yep. These are all factors, right? Mm-hmm. There are a number of studies that show that the number of words that kids in low-income communities are exposed to versus kids in more affluent areas, it's a drastic difference. That there is a fundamental.
Oh, yeah.
This is why my argument has always been, even if you think it is race,
Yeah.
you shouldn't make it about race. You should make it about class.
Right.
Because we know that a lack of education, we know that lack of access to books and to the internet, things like this, are going to impact you. It doesn't matter what your race is.
Exactly.
If you put somebody in the middle of the desert with no food as a baby, they're not going to develop properly, relative to everybody in big cities. And then don't be surprised when a starved, malnourished individual who never read a book can't solve an IQ test.
Exactly.
So I was arguing with someone on the left who was just, man, it was so brutal about how race is the key factor that needs to be solved. And my issue was like, that's literally what the race realists and like the alt-right are using as an argument. You shouldn't use that because class would solve everyone's problem.
Yes. And I think there's something even more fundamental than that. And that's that race is a social construct. I mean, there was a cover in National Geographic a few months ago in which they reviewed this body of scientific literature voluminous body of literature, and they point out that race is not a biological, it's not a scientific fact.
So break that down for us, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who are like,
right.
What do you mean? I can
yes,
see
so I mean,
you.
I believe it's either March or April, I believe, the edition of National Geographic, in which they literally lay out, so let's look at race. Is race a scientific or a biological fact? And actually, on the cover, you have a white and black girl on the cover of that issue of National Geographic. And so this has been an argument that a number of scholars, everyone from conservatives like Thomas Sowell all the way to Stephen Gould, who they've all critiqued what Charles Murray had to say in the bell curve. And it all goes back to the idea that race is a social construct. There's not a scientific way to really differentiate between who is black and who is white.
Well, I mean, I can look at you and say that, we look different. You've got different color skin. I mean,
that's based upon phenotypic things that you can observe. But if you actually look at the human genome, there is no way scientifically to say.
So you're saying that basically if you took like two DNA groups from
exactly,
two people, it would be...
Right, exactly.
Interesting.
Could it just be that we're not smart enough
There's greater
scientifically,
variation within what we call a race than there is between races, scientifically.
Oh, so you mean like...
There's greater difference between what we call race. There's greater variation and difference within a race than there is between races.
So let me play devil's advocate
Sure.
a little bit so we can try and work through this.
Yeah.
I went to Thailand.
Right.
Everybody was shorter than me.
Right.
And I really do mean everybody. I think it was like it was Chinese New Year, and I'm looking down, everyone was shorter. And so one of the arguments I hear is that if you go to a certain area, you'll see that the height of people is different. Is it not possible that there are other attributes we can't see that are different too, including intelligence, or maybe even things that we don't really talk about? Maybe empathy is stronger in one group of people from one area, or...
So I think that can be a very important observation. I think there are a number of sociocultural factors that you've got to look at. I mean, cultures are very, very different, and anthropology shows us this. Right. It's not just that values and practices are different. What people are eating is different. The way people live their lives are very different. And these cultures have had those norms for a very long time. So in that sense, they can evolve differently than we have in other areas.
Yeah. Well, then, one of the arguments, I was arguing with some race realists. They refer to themselves in Berkeley. And they asked me, do you think that life, natural selection causes various life forms to change over time?
Right.
I said yes. And they said, do you think that two species that are very similar put in two different environments would slowly become different from each other over a long period of time? Say, like Darwin pointed out with the birds, some have longer beaks. And I said, right. And they said, then don't you think it's possible that certain people in certain parts of the world would become smarter or stupider because there's different reasons for why they would, benefit in their community? And then I immediately said, no. And I have a reason for why I said that. But that's their argument. So first, before I give my opinion, I'd like to ask you, how would you...
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're saying are they smarter or are more or less intelligent, is this based on their ability to solve a math test? I mean, there's just one thing, right? If you just take medicine and science itself, that is not even an institution. It's not even a thing in other parts of the world.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? If you look at specific cultures in Indonesia, if you look at specific cultures in Asia, the idea of like a DSMV where you can categorize mental, this is not even a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So science and medicine and psychopharmacology, that's not even a thing there. So we're talking about, in some sense, this goes to cultural relativism, that cultures are very, very different in terms of their norms, in terms of their values, in terms of their practices, in terms of the institutions that exist there and the value they place on those institutions. So I think it's very tough to do those kinds of cross-cultural comparisons.
I agree. That's that's pretty much my position. And you know what I told these people on the right, even if this is what I said to people on the left, even if you think it is race, you should argue culture.
Yeah.
Because you like America better, right?
Absolutely.
No, for real though. I mean, it's almost like look. First of all, nobody likes racists.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And I told the guy, I said, so you're a racist? He goes, no, I'm not. I just recognize science. And I said, hold on, the definition of racism, and then I explained it to him, and he goes, okay, yeah, I guess so. And I'm like, hey, look, man,
he admitted.
If you believe it, why would you reject this idea that describes who you are? For me, I got into an argument with them. They said Somalians are provably, intellectually inferior, or whatever. And I was like, that's a country. That's not a race.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, but they're black Africans. And I said, yeah, but you're singling out a country that's been in drought and famine and civil war. And they went, yeah, right, but that's because they're not smart enough.
Oh
and
my
I'm
God.
like, oh no, dude.
And then it's also this thing, the standards that we are using for how we measure intelligence there, it's all based on Western norms.
Right.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that's something we don't even consider. It's all based upon things that have been well established in the society we know best.
I feel like bilingual people can understand this a lot better than monolingual
so,
people.
yeah.
Because there are words in other languages that don't translate.
Right.
I was reading something about there's like a word in an African language it's a really short word that means some ridiculous, like in order to say it in English, it's something like, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's like when someone loves someone, but that person is in love with someone else who actually is in love with someone else, creating this long chain of like mournful like desire that can't be ever attained. And I'm like, that's a mouthful in English, and it's like one word in this culture.
Yeah,
because they understand it's an instant thing in their mind. People who, it's really crazy to me because I feel like language is, like what language you speak is almost on par with a programming language. And if you know more than one language, you can perceive the world in a very different way.
You can't, right.
Mm-hmm. When I started learning Spanish, I realized that in English we use way more articles. And so we would say something like, is this something I would consider? But in Spanish, you would say something like, me consider this.
Right,
it's
right.
and
it means the same, exactly. Yeah.
But they, in different languages, they can understand much larger concepts very simply.
Right.
And so then it becomes very difficult, in my opinion, to actually be able to quantify if someone, because of, their what we perceive as race,
right.
Will be smarter or stupider or more or less capable.
Right.
Honestly, in my opinion, actually not my opinion. I'm gonna take my opinion out of it. There was this chess grandmaster. Are you familiar with this story?
Which chess grandmaster is this?
It's the specific story about he wrote a letter to a female scientist. He wasn't a chess grandmaster. He's a male scientist wrote a letter to a female saying, "I know how to bring genius to train geniuses," and so they agreed to have children, and all of their children became grandmasters.
It's a real story.
Real story.
I haven't heard this one.
But the argument was, right, but they're your kids, and you're a scientist. So you're just proving that, genetics. And they said, how about you raise some adoptees from a foreign country?
And see if.
And at that point, he said, I'm an old man and I'm not raising any more kids. But, basically, he had an idea that under certain conditions, you can develop a genius.
Just through nurture. It's nurture alone.
Through nurture alone. Far be it from me to disagree with the opinion of a scientist who actually pulled it off. Mm-hmm. But I will, pointing out that they are his kids, disagree with him slightly. I think nature and nurture have a bit of a balance, but I do believe that the environmental factors greatly outweigh nature just because there's so much greater variance in environment that, look, I feel like you can take any kid from any part of the world and make him a math genius. Am I wrong to think that?
I think nurture can play a big role. Genius is another one of those things. How are you defining genius? Is it like you come up with,
So let me guess.
do you have to come up with a groundbreaking scientific theory to be a genius, or do you have to get all A's to be a genius, or do you have to be the smartest person in your school to be a genius?
I don't know.
It's like, how are we like, you know what I mean?
How do you
define
quantify?
genius?
Yeah.
But I think you're pointing to something important when you're talking about, it's nature and nurture, and it's actually, and science supports this. It's very complicated. There's so many factors. You've got sociocultural factors, environmental factors, and then you've got reinforcement. This goes back to B.F. Skinner, right? Behaviors that are reinforced and rewarded, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see more of.
One of the key components to my opinions on the matter is growing up in a very mixed area with Hispanic immigrants, Polish immigrants, the black community. We were side by side. It's very segregated in Chicago. It's pretty messed up.
South side?
Yeah, South Side. So near 47th Street, it's literally a divider line between yeah, it's like mostly Polish migrant, some Asian, a little bit of Asian, Hispanic, and and then right across 47th, all black, because that's how Chicago does it.
Right. Yeah.
Don't ask me. And the police can be pretty bad. Like when people cross sides, it's screwed up. Okay. But growing up here, there were a bunch of white crackheads who were hopped up on goofballs all the time, who were dumb as a box of rocks. And then I had like the glasses wearing nerdy Pokemon card playing, black friend who was smarter than everybody else. And when I grew up around people of all these different races and ethnicities and just beliefs, seeing this variety among them, it's just, in my personal experience, I couldn't, I'm like, why is it that in this one neighborhood where everyone's almost equally in terms of like the socioeconomic level we're in, this white guy is literally doing drugs, even though he's got the same opportunities as the black guy, and the black guy is the valedictorian in the class. Something's wrong there. It's the culture. It's the family. This dude had an opportunity. My friend who fell into smoking weed all day and then started doing heroin or whatever, and then so did the other guy. They went to the same school. They had the same friends, same teachers. What made that happen? And in the same argument, there's a lot of people on the left who think that police only brutalize or like primarily brutalize people for racist reasons. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, that white crackhead was getting beat up by the cops all the time. Right. So it's like, to me, that's what made it a class issue. That if somebody fell into a bad lifestyle and did bad things and wasn't, for whatever reason, there was no one there to help them. They didn't have the willpower or something about them.
Opportunities, access, right.
Yeah, exactly. They go to jail, they become criminals, they overdose, the cops beat them up for being, whatever. And then
the police issue is complicated too, right?
Totally,
there are these studies out there that show that oftentimes what leads to these interactions with police officers that we see circulated on social media and corporate media, oftentimes it can be about formations of hypermasculinity. It can be about, there are studies that show this, not just the fact that someone has an aggressive personality. It doesn't necessarily have to be the fact that someone has a bias based upon, the race of someone else.
Right.
You see what I mean? That can certainly be the case, but that there can be other things at work too.
I think cops are very macho dudes. You
know
what I mean? They're very like, I'm the authority.
Right.
I'm not saying that to deride them or say that they're all bad people. I think that they're
And Phil Goff is the guy who's done these studies. Actually, he had a lab at UCLA and he did a study in Denver where he looked at a particular police department, and what the phrase he started using was that you could have racism without racist, and what he meant by that was you could have African Americans being treated differently by police, but not based upon racist beliefs, based upon a number of other factors.
You see, this is the thing. If you're one of these far-right, hardcore nationalists, or if you're just a regular nationalist who loves America, I feel like culture is your best argument. Right. I think in a lot of these videos, not all of them, maybe not the majority, but there's been a lot of videos circulated where you see the police shoot someone who's unarmed. And in some of these videos, you'll see the guy pulling his pants up. Have you noticed this?
Which one are you talking about? There have been a number.
There was very specifically, a guy was outside of a 7-Eleven, and a cop told him not to move. And the guy reached down to his waistband, and the cop killed him. And everyone said, the cops killed this unarmed guy. And you watch the video, and the right was like, oh, he was going for his waistband. He had to have had a gun. And I was just like, he was pulling his pants up.
Right.
For real.
Right.
The video in Arizona, I think it was Arizona. Remember when the guy was crawling, playing Simon Says?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When the guy crawling went to pull his pants up, the cops shot him.
Right.
And so why is it then that we might see more people of a certain culture be shot by police? Well, the dude who tucks in his polo and has a brown leather belt isn't putting his hand by his waist, and his waist is clearly visible. And the dude wearing a baggy shirt and saggy pants, which is his God-given right in this country to do, the cops aren't going to be able to see what's under his shirt. Right. If his pants fall down and he goes to reach for it, the cops are going to freak out. Right. So there are cultural issues at play here too,
Absolutely. And then I think another thing on top of that is the fact that there are a number of instances that we don't see. What we see are the ones that are circulated on MSNBC and CNN and Fox, right? Those are the ones that we're aware of. And so that becomes, it almost constructs our perception of that particular reality. there are a number of other cases, right, in which there are people of various races under different circumstances experiencing similar things, right? And so it makes it easier for us to not pay attention to the nuances of each individual case.
And that's what bothers me the most about today's politics is there's no nuance.
Right.
None.
Right.
You invited a racist, therefore you are racist.
Yeah,
That's
right.
ridiculous.
Right.
You know. What time are we at?
41.
Damn,
Solid.
really?
Yeah,
This
that's
has
fast.
been good, man.
15.
I've been
Yeah.
having fun. This has been
Me
good.
too.
This has
I
been
was
good.
like,
Yeah.
I gotta think about
This is
some
good
more topics,
stuff.
'cause
Yeah.
We're good
We've been
so
covering.
quickly.
Yeah. Hit anything.
All right. Well, should we segue? Should we keep going? What any things we should?
I'm trying to think.
I'm just gonna ramble on culture real quick because it's something I'm just so passionate about.
Yeah.
Like,
Sure.
I think class and culture, you know, I'll say it for the third time. Like, even if your argument is race, you're wasting your breath. And you know, a lot of people who are very into the race idea are gonna get so angry. But you know what, man? In this day and age, it's for one, it's a losing argument. One I completely think is incorrect to begin with.
Oh, yeah.
But all of the problems you're claiming could simply be solved by class.
I do think I would say this. I think it's very important that we focus on class, but I think that there are I think implicit bias is real, and that when
totally.
you see someone who is dressed a certain way, who is of a certain complexion, who is in a certain environment, there are a number of assumptions, preconceived notions, not because you're a bad person.
Right.
Yep.
Yep.
But because you're a human being and you're concerned about your safety and you've seen things in our culture and our media,
So
and you make those assumptions, and that can lead to
there's
problematic judgments.
When you learn sales, when you learn social engineering, social engineering. I grew up in the hacker community. People trust what looks like them.
Right.
This is just I don't know if there's scientific fact behind this, but this is a core tenet of a lot of social
Pretty
engineering.
sure there is. That's a biological.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah,
People-
What's familiar.
It's hardwired into
exactly.
people.
Go to Times Square and look at couples, and they'll be like wearing the same kind of shirt, the same glasses. Like people are even attracted to themselves. But so one of the examples I heard is, let's say you're a Mediterranean,
Right.
in a very ancient, very long time ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, you're safe with your tribe, and then all of a sudden you see someone who looks dramatically different than you. They might hurt you. You don't know.
Right.
And so we selected to have a favorability towards those who look like
Right.
us.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then this also starts getting into cultural issues with like religion, how people would draw half of the Jesus fish, and then if you knew what that meant, you'd finish it, and they knew it was safe because you agree with them, you wouldn't be executed for being a heretic or something like that. So I agree on the implicit bias and all that stuff, and I think Brett Weinstein talked about that, right? Am I wrong? That
Yeah, no, you're
Yeah,
right.
he did.
within all of us, we have a natural tendency to be attracted to those that look like us. We have to fight
Right.
that.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
I'm like, I like Brett Weinstein.
Yeah.
He's a
Very
smart
sharp guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
There are a lot of people who are dead set on the race issue, be it from, everyone's racist. The far left says everyone is racist, you must accept it, and everything is white supremacy. To the far right, who are literally racists. We call them the far left and the far right, but whatever, that's how we identify the factions. But then we end up seeing, at a Trump rally, for instance, Antifa shows up and starts beating people.
Right.
And then there are extreme far right terrorist organizations and things like that. So I asked you earlier who you thought was being less civil.
Yeah.
But who do you think's being more violent in terms of politics?
In terms of politics,
Yeah.
and so we're saying the exercise, the actual violence,
Yeah.
not
Yeah. The
making
exercise of actual
statements that right. I think that's a tough one. I think we've seen a lot of stuff in the news where you have extremist groups on the left. You have Antifa and things like that. But I mean, I think it's complex. I think
Yeah, I
we
agree.
have to try to understand why is this the case right now? What are the factors that have led to this? Why is this where we are at this moment in our history, right? And I think that means we have to go a bit beyond the fact that people are just being violent because they disagree. There's something deeper going on. People feel looked down upon. People feel left out. They feel neglected. They feel as though their grievances and circumstances haven't been addressed.
I think that there's a big concern when we start seeing democratic socialists winning. Not because their ideas are bad or wrong or anything. Personally, I disagree with a lot of their ideas, like abolish borders and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think the only reason you see the success of these more far-left groups is because of the failures of our current system. It's like you mentioned, these people they don't feel like they're
Right.
doing anything that's working.
Exactly.
So they're going to look for something else. They're going to pull to the fringes. And then what concerns me then is when these people feel like the system doesn't benefit them. They went to school, they played by the rules, and it failed. So they turn to a more far left ideology, And then people turn around and say, see those people over there? Yeah, those are Nazis. And it's just like an old dude wearing a Trump hat. And then all of a sudden you get a guy in Berkeley with a bike lock. You get people fighting in the streets. Yeah, I mean...
We got to look towards solutions, too. You know,
that's where I was going to go.
Yeah.
What is the solution to incivility? Because people on the far left argue incivility is the solution. They think there should be fighting. You know what the craziest thing? My God, there was a woman. I believe she's black. She could be Indian or something. Dark skinned. Said she doesn't know any black or Jewish people who prioritize civility over urgency or something like that. Politeness, who are polite, and that felt to me like something a white supremacist would say. The idea that someone of a different race wouldn't want to be polite. Right. That kind of stuff worries me. Anyway, I bring it up, but I guess we should go back to what's the solution then if people are pushing into these more fringe,
I think there's some things that we can do at an institutional level and then things we can do at an individual level. I think that first I'll begin with the individual level. I think we've got to try to understand where people are coming from, why they view this political moment in the way that they do, and to kind of try to step outside of ourselves and gain that understanding and to resist the urge. It's easy to say, we've been talking about far left and far right, and there are certainly trends. And I think you're right to note a lot of the trends we've seen. But I think it's important that we also be wary of how much we're homogenizing, because there are differences among the far left, differences among the far right, differences in the center. And so I think it's important to attend to those nuances, because I think it can lead to more misperceptions. I think we can lose sight of some of the ambiguities. So that on an individual level, I think is where we can start.
I feel like we have these islands. We have the center, we have the right, we have the left. To me, it looks like the center and the right have no problem putting a bridge up there and having those conversations. And then there's when it comes to the left,
it depends on who on the right, I think.
For sure. On the island, you have people on one side who don't want to come to where the middle is. But there's people in the center who are like, let's talk.
Exactly. Center left and center right, I think, are willing to sit down. Yeah.
It feels to me, and I could be wrong, but it does feel to me like the left is more unwilling to have conversations, to say that people are too far gone, they don't want to talk. Obviously, there are people on the far right who feel this way, but I have a friend who is a progressive.
Yeah.
And on Twitter, on Facebook, she messaged me this really angry rant, and then stopped talking to me. And it took me I sent her a message, just kind of whoa, hey, why are you mad at me? Let's talk. Yeah. Fortunately, about a week later, she apologized. But I had another friend who just blocked me outright. I had a friend
didn't say anything.
I had a friend who was a progressive, and I posted a UN report on the migrant crisis in the Mediterranean.
Okay.
The UN said most people crossing were migrants, not refugees. And so I said, this is really interesting. Posted it to Facebook. Boom, instant block. The people on the right aren't doing that, to me at least,
Right.
And so I'm kind of concerned because it feels like, how do we regardless of whether or not it's an issue of the left, how do we build a bridge with somebody who's so ingrained in their beliefs they don't want to talk about it?
It's tough. Social media isn't helping.
Oh yeah.
I don't think it's helping. Making that effort individually to say, I know this person thinks differently from me. I know they have a different set of views, a different set of experiences. I am going to go into this interaction with good faith and try to see what I can learn. In some sense, our present moment makes you think that can only be an idealistic, kind of goal. But I think we do have to strive for it. And I think that when we find those examples, Robert George and Cornel West come to mind. Are you guys familiar with them?
Oh, yeah.
Cornel West.
Yeah.
Cornel West. And Robert George is actually a very close friend of Cornel West. But Cornel West is Democratic Socialist.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Activist, public intellectual. And Robert George is an academic, public intellectual, but very conservative. Both brilliant. And they have been doing this series where they go around the country speaking at colleges and universities and various corporate institutions about the need to have conversations across ideological divides. And I think those kinds of examples, we need more conversations like that.
I was in Boston, and there was a protest. There was people on the right, people on the left, and there was tension. Some fights broke out.
Yeah.
I was actually able to do an interview with someone from the Democratic Socialists of America because they were civil and cordial,
right.
and didn't hold anything against me for not supporting them.
Right.
And it was interesting because one of the people on their side was flying a Soviet flag. And I said to him, why do you view them as sort of you view them as an other? You know, don't you think you should like be more welcoming? And he said, you know, look, man, look over there. You see that Confederate flag? Like, these people are racist. Whether or not they're willing to admit it or not, if they tolerate that kind of, you know, symbolism. And then I said, well, hold on, you've got a communist flag from the Soviet Union. And he goes, no, we don't. And I was like, you do, look. And I pointed and he goes, oh my God. Oh, that is not us. That does not represent us. And I said, but wait, you see? You see, maybe the people over there don't agree with that flag either. And it's when we view each other as the other. You know, so I guess I got 2 points here. One, the DSAs, I feel like they're very civil. They've been giving me interviews. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez seems like a straight shooter. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of her platform, but she seems like a cool person. Right. And I've been able to get interviews with them, which has been really difficult among people we align with the far left. And, you know, hopefully, I guess if it does come to a point where they do take a substantial bit of power, they will be politely political. You know, they'll push for these things, but they're willing to have the conversations. And I hope, you know, as much as I disagree with a lot of their policy, I hope we can maintain some level of civility.
I've had the same interactions with DSA members at protests, where a lot of times you try to interview Antifa and they'll tell you to trot off. Right. Yeah. But if you talk to DSA members, they're all about telling you what their message is about. Right. They're quick to disavow any kind of violence or aggression. And I think that's super admirable.
Exactly. And I think what we're doing right here, drawing that distinction, because both are far on the left.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's what I mean by not homogenizing. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Not overgeneralizing.
Yep. Exactly.
Because one is a good example that we need more of that, right? The other is, more of that not in terms of the ideas, but in terms of being willing to engage across the divides. And
No, I just wanted to, ask, where's the extremist center? You know, the centrists who are getting violent and flying gray flags, lousy neutrals. Right. You know, I guess I feel like we kind of beat the civility stuff to death, but you know what we didn't get to is you work for the Atlantic.
Yes.
You're a mainstream media guy.
Yeah.
You're sitting here with us alternative media types. There's a lot of criticism for the mainstream media. A lot that I think is warranted, and a lot I think that isn't warranted. Yeah. Let me just start off by asking you, what are your thoughts on the whole fake news, mainstream media kind of talking point?
I think fake news is something. I mean, it's real. It's real.
But in what capacity?
Right. Exactly. So I think it gets appropriated and used, and by appropriated, I'm not referring to any kind of cultural appropriation type stuff. It's used, and when people use it, they can mean any number of things.
Right. Exactly.
Here's what I think. My biggest criticism is of large media, corporate media institutions. It's that they tend to just recycle the dominant narratives on all of the most pressing issues.
Yeah.
And they're losing sight of that gray area in between that we really need to focus on. And just showing that these things are really complicated. It's not just when you show the same things over and over again and you're airing the same things over and over again, that affects the way in which the public perceives these issues, and it makes it easier to oversimplify.
I feel like there's like a journalist class, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, you're wearing a suit, I'm wearing a T-shirt.
Right.
You know, what perfect... I would say it's a pseudo example. I don't think we're very different people, but it is kind of funny. You work at the Atlantic. I'm on YouTube, and here I am in my T-shirt and beanie. You're dressed very, very nicely.
I had a few interviews today, so I think.
Yeah. No, that's why I say I'm just. It's a pseudo difference.
Right, no,
but it seems like I think it was the Columbia Journalism Review wrote an article. I'm maybe familiar, where they talked about how there was this class shift that happened where journalism became mostly upper class people,
right?
Because the jobs are low paying. Few and far between. So if you want to work for a company like Reuters, New York Times, you got to live in New York. You got to live close enough. How can you afford that when they pay so little relative to the other industries? And so it ended up being people who had trust funds, who had parents who could support them in school.
Exactly.
And then you end up with a media. In my experience working for these companies, you know, the CEO of Vice said that he was running a daycare for Trustafarians. I'm paraphrasing, but it's basic. That's. I am not misconstruing his statement. What he was saying is that the people who worked for him were working for free, and their parents could afford it. Right. They didn't have to worry about money. And so when you have a class of people who, in all likelihood, haven't experienced poverty and adversity, now they're all friends with each other, or they're in a similar bubble, then it feels like the mainstream media becomes dominated by this privileged narrative. Dare I say it?
Yeah. like almost a professional class of like elites, right?
Not working class for sure.
Right, yeah, not working
So
class.
even if that's like the main distinction,
Right.
I feel like, we talked about how they predicted the election so wrong.
Yeah.
They've been wrong about a lot of things.
And clickbait, man, that's...
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean? The idea that we got to run a certain number of stories that we know are going to get a ton of clicks.
Mm-hmm.
We've got,
Do you do that?
I get that it's kind of... No. I'm not interested in that, right?
You do
So,
the monthly, like that's the magazine, right?
Right. And so I just accepted the position, so I actually am not yet.
Oh,
I
okay.
haven't taken the... Yeah.
So can I ask you when you start?
September 3rd is my official start date.
On September 4th is when you'll be zombified.
That's, everything's going to change. Exactly.
And then you're going to be like, I never said any of that. That was
all
wrong.
that goes out the window, right?
Yeah.
Well, the thing that's funny to me is I have a lot of friends who work in mainstream media, and we call it the meat grinder because they have to sit down and write a certain number of blogs per week.
Exactly.
And I've had a friend say, I literally have nothing to write about, so I'm gonna do something so ridiculous and so minor that it hurts me to actually write it. And I was like, I can't imagine doing that kind of work.
I can't imagine not having anything to talk about.
Oh, that's you, though.
No, exactly. Like, everybody who knows who I am, like, I go on my live stream, I talk for 2.5 hours nonstop.
Really?
Yeah, my brain's
2.5 hours nonstop?
Yeah, I did. The longest stream I ever did is what I'm known for is 22 hours, walking around during Occupy Wall Street while this whole day, 22 hours nonstop. When they when they raided Occupy, I started streaming and I stayed up all night, all the next day until the next night for 22 hours straight, and I got to a point where I couldn't open my hand because I was holding an umbrella and I just
that's determination there.
No electrolytes. I was burned out, so my hands were cramped shut, and I made a joke about needing a banana, and someone actually ran and brought me a banana. Yeah, because they were watching live.
People are listening.
Yeah. But people were buying batteries for me to keep me streaming, and people brought me naked juice. That was the cure. I chugged a blue machine or whatever, and then everything was cured. And boy, I slept like I was gonna say I slept like a baby, but babies don't sleep very well. They cry and they crap themselves. I slept like a rock. I was like I was out for hours. But yeah, I worked in mainstream media. I worked for some companies, and for one, the marketing consultants, specifically referring to when I worked at Fusion, which is now Splinter, were just like, we're going to make our most money marketing to women. And millennials are progressive, that's who we target. So I asked him, if we have a factual news story that would be offensive to our audience, do we not report it? Right. And he said, yeah, I think that's fair.
Really?
Yeah, and that's what soured mainstream or just corporate news for me. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. Now, I actually like the Atlantic. Mm-hmm. Like the Atlantic's a far cry from Splinter.
It too. I think I think it's
that's
all
why
right.
you'd go to work there.
Right.
So I'm not as concerned as I think the New York Times does a good job. I think the Wall Street Journal does a good job. I say good. I don't say perfect. I don't say great.
I don't think anyone's doing a perfect job.
Right. Well, the New York Times got us into a war.
Right. Yeah.
Not on their own, but
I mean, we just need to, and I'm referring to the media here. I understand that there is a concern. We are in a capitalist democracy, so you have competition. Mm-hmm. So everybody wants the lead. Everybody wants to be first to the big stories. But the idea that what's driving the work that you're doing is just the number of clicks or just getting a lot of, you know what I mean? That can't be the...
I'll say it right now. I mean, this podcast we're doing is counter to what YouTube would prefer.
It is.
Mm-hmm. YouTube would rather I go on and just very angrily rant about race realists.
On and on and on.
Instead of having a smart, calm, and rational conversation, which might be thought-provoking, might be a little offensive at some points to some people. But YouTube is, the average person is going to be satisfied by hearing their opinions back at themselves.
Confirmation bias.
Yep. Okay. And that means that when we do these sit-down interviews, they often do not do as well as when I just do a regular old commentary video. But there's a reason we do them. It has to be done.
Right.
And that's why it's such a bummer to me that people won't watch it. They'd rather see the confirmation bias, and that's sad.
It is sad.
It's a bummer. It's not meant to deride or insult anyone in specific. Just it's a reflection on humanity.
Oh yeah, I mean the reason we have these outrage click farm media sites are because that's what people want.
Exactly.
And it sucks that a lot of people are playing to it because it's just driving the problem.
Exactly.
Yep.
But if you think about the alternative, it wouldn't be as lucrative. It still has its place in society.
Yeah.
But I think you see a lot more just media shaping itself around what people want, and you get into all these ethically shady areas, and we're seeing the consequences.
This is why I hate the internet. I'm half kidding, and I said half kidding because as much as I recognize we're able to have a smart conversation like this and reach the people who want to have it because of the internet.
Right.
At the same time, it allows anyone to put out anything, and then we get flat earthers. And
there's no filter, no quality filter. On
Yep.
And we have free press, which I believe in, which means you got the flat earthers out there.
I have a hypothesis. I wouldn't even call it a theory. I made a video about this a couple days ago, but a marketing guy told me that the reason why a lot of these newer digital outlets push feminism and progressivism is because women are more likely to share, and anger is the emotion that elicits is most likely to elicit a response or a share. So what they end up doing is producing a lot of content aimed at women to make them angry. And so that's why you'll see a lot of feminist narratives, according to this marketing guy. So in my video, I went about and did some research and found out that maybe that's not why they do it, but it's a sound argument. It is true that women share more than men, almost twice as much.
Really?
It is,
I didn't know
yeah.
that.
And the reason they share, and this is my hypothesis, women share according to several different studies, even Pew Internet Research, because of something that either they want to show people they care about it, or it made them feel something. Men don't do that. Men share because they find it entertaining. So this says to me...
This is Pew?
This was a bunch of different ones, including Pew showed the difference. The Pew research shows men and women do share for different at different levels. But there was a couple different marketing websites research that said that women share because it makes them feel and because they want to show they care about something, and men share to entertain. Men want to build influence and entertain. Women want to show what they care about and highlight things that make them feel. And anger is the most likely to do that. And so then I said, I wonder why it is that in a lot of media companies, they're about feminism, about these political causes. And then when you look at the alternative, it's a bunch of memes about cartoon frogs and other silly nonsense. And I was like, oh my God, is it because men don't care about feminism or aren't going to share, for the most part, not all men, but a lot of men are just going to share things they think are funny to build influence, to make jokes, because that's what men like sharing. And women like sharing causes and things that make them feel. So I'm curious,
did you feel like that aligned with your intuitions? These studies that you cited, did you read them and say, oh yeah, that makes sense, that's what I thought, or were you surprised by them?
I was surprised about why men shared.
Okay, and I wonder how they found that out, like how you know why someone's sharing something. I guess you do a survey.
The article I did said there was a survey of 2,000 people and specifically Facebook.
Right.
I wouldn't say the thing about women surprised me in any way, because when I was working for Fusion, I don't want to necessarily call them out because this is specific to them, but I was talking to a marketing consultant who didn't necessarily work with Fusion, but who told me that they advise companies to target women because women share more than men. They also advise companies to make things that make people angry because anger gets more shares than anything else.
Right.
Anger and awe are the top. So make awe-inspiring. And so what they said was you'll typically see something about, like, I don't know, police brutality or feminism, men, patriarchy, because women will be offended by that personally. So they'll get angry and they're more likely to share. And they felt like if they produce content for men, they're just targeting a smaller market.
So it's extremely manipulative then.
Oh, totally.
Extremely, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that you're looking at these metrics to see who is more likely to, you know what I mean? And that's the basis on which you're creating your content and putting it out there.
Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, are we doomed?
I think if you look at the history of this country, there are highs and there are lows. I don't think history is just a kind of upward. I mean, broadly speaking, it is, but there are highs and lows, right? And I'm waiting for an uptick.
Yeah, I am worried. I do think, we did a podcast almost 2 weeks ago now about, it was called like the Second Civil War. Not to say that it will or will happen, but I do think we're leaning in that direction. Whatever form it might take, I don't think it's going to look like what people would assume is of people like running through the streets with knives and everything. But what concerns me is that with no filter on the internet, we're going to see lies and deceit. Just today, some guy was posting a bunch of false things about me I had to correct. But he's got tens of thousands of followers who are going to think he's telling the truth when he's wrong. And then what happens is people make assumptions about other people. They assume that a regular old Trump supporter is a Nazi. Then they say punch a Nazi. Right. And then you see these street battles. And as long as the rhetoric keeps escalating and people keep pushing for incivility, I'm really concerned that it's going to get to that point, you know?
I certainly hope not.
Oh, yeah. I like watching cartoons and playing video games too much to have to worry about street-level conflict.
Yeah.
What are we at?
We're at 106, so.
So you think we're good?
We can wrap up whenever.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so, man, wow, if you guys made it this far, bravo. But, Zach, you mentioned your book in the beginning.
Yes.
I suppose we didn't really get into topics of censorship or anything like that.
Yeah.
But do you want to just quickly mention your book and explain what it's about?
Yeah. So my book is called Uncensored: My Life and Uncomfortable Conversations at the Intersection of Black and White America, and it's a memoir. It's the story of my life, and specifically, it's the story of how I became the person that I am today. So how did I come to be an advocate for viewpoint diversity and free speech on college campuses? And
a liberal.
And as a liberal Democrat, right?
Yeah.
As someone who, supports Barack Obama and likes Bill Clinton. And, so that's the story that the book tells. And in it, I try to speak to a number of other issues as well.
I feel like I mentioned before, that the extremes are making everybody seem so much more reasonable. I feel like there's a lot of good people can get from reading your book simply because you're a sane liberal. Not to say that all liberals are insane, but there are certainly extremists who claim to be liberal. And it just bothers me so much because people say to me, Tim, are you conservative now? And I'm like, nope, still a liberal. I'm just not crazy. And then you sound like a really smart guy. You've got your opinions. You support Obama. You supported. You said you support Clinton too.
I voted for Hillary Clinton. I was
there you go.
Hillary Clinton,
but you support the right of people to come on your campus and say
absolutely.
crazy stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's admirable.
Thanks.
Right on, man. Cool. Well, thank you all so much for watching. Do you want to mention your stuff, Emily, before we sign out?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at MomesMolly, MomesMolli.
Do you want to mention your Twitter and social media?
Sure. My Twitter handle is Zachary R. Wood.
And if you're not familiar, my name is Tim Poole. I'm a journalist on Twitter at Timcast. I mentioned this in the beginning. I'm going to say it again. We were originally doing these on Sundays, but we're just going to do them whenever we can because I don't think it necessarily makes sense just to try and schedule a smart conversation. And I'm going to have more videos that are... So my second channel, which is Timcast News on YouTube, is going to focus on just me kind of ranting at various news stories. I'm still going to have my regular old daily videos, but when we get intelligent speakers and good guests and professionals, we'll have those up when they come. So stick around, stay tuned, because Sunday we have tentatively scheduled Mark Perry, an economist, who has filed several Title IX complaints against universities for discriminating against men. So check it out, stay tuned, and thanks for listening.